Welcome to Don't Follow the Shepherd. I'm ecstatic to have Dr. Hilary Anger Elfenbein, who is a distinguished professor at the Olin Business School at Washington University in St. Louis. She holds 4 degrees from Harvard, a Ph.D. in organizational behavior, a master's degree in statistics, and undergraduate degrees in physics and Sanskrit. Her research focuses on emotion in the workplace with a particular emphasis on emotional intelligence and on cultural differences, really in a global context. She launched a new Substack publication recently, What Did You Expect?, which she describes as aggressively moderate political writing. In it, Dr. Elfenbein has written extensively about anti-Semitism on college campuses from a socio-political and geopolitical uh, bent. On July 1st, she joins the Harvard Alumni Association Council for the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, where I'm sure her influence will be much appreciated. Uh, Thank you so much for doing this. I'm honored to have you. Uh, I followed your writings. We've been part of this group, Parents Against Anti-Semitism on college campuses, which has been fascinating from my vantage point, especially considering I don't have kids and I insert things that are probably inappropriate and unnecessary, but I love
Wait, you don't have kids and you're on that? I assumed because, it's called Mothers
following.
Against College Anti-Semitism, MACA, which, originally I thought, well, that sounds a bit like MAGA. And I realized ultimately that was deliberate. And the organizers really are going in a direction that's very much MAGA. But I thought, and then at first I thought, well, there are dads on there, of course. But so you don't have kids and you're
No.
on Mothers Against. So what brought you to that?
Well, because it's so funny you asked, and thank you for asking. I belong to Clubhouse, which I'd also like to get you on because this Fox News reporter has asked to actually have you on. We'll talk about that later. He's very moderate, by the way, but and he's an editor at the New York City Bureau. But he uh so I joined it because I've been on this Clubhouse app, this social audio app where people convene, much like on Twitter Spaces. If you're familiar with Twitter Spaces, it's where people just convene and talk rather than text, and it's just as toxic at times, right? But I was on it, and I've been following current events for 4 years since I've been on it with COVID, and I have a whole cohort of people that I talk to. It's very stimulating for me because I'm no longer in an academic space. So that's the closest I really get.
Wait, Jordan, you're like a performance artist drawn to drama. Is
That,
it all?
it's trauma based. It's trauma based. It's trauma based. I my childhood has brought me to Clubhouse and these topics because you're right. I'm not even supposed to be involved. And the other thing that's kind of funny is that there's a Los Angeles chapter of Maca, and there are others. And so I joined, and I was not only the only guy, but of course the only one. I went to an event, and I was the only one without children, and I think they had the same response. But I was fascinated by all the conjecture and whatnot. So,
It's funny you call it a trauma response. I realized actually relatively recently in my life that I have a set point for how much drama and conflict I have in my life, and it's not zero. It's not zero. And that actually starting the writing that I've been doing and the Substack has really been very good for harmony in the rest of my life because I'm getting it out in
oh,
that space.
see, this is why it's great journaling for an esteemed academic like yourself, because you're probably so used, so conditioned to the rigors of academia and peer review work that you don't get a chance to add as much of your kind of
Yeah.
nuanced take, and it's probably a
Yeah,
great release.
exactly. And as in academic writing, it goes through peer review, it goes through rounds and rounds. And here, there's just liberating feeling of going straight to press.
Oh, it's addictive in that way.
Mhm.
Like I think you've caught the addiction too, not that it's
Yeah.
infectious necessarily, but yeah, you get something out and you're like, wow, now I'm thinking of this. I can do this in 2 days or get it out in an afternoon. Totally. and I use animal models. I mean, I haven't published a lot on Substack in the past year, but like even my background in veterinary parasitology has now triggered like I now want to talk about dark tetrad personality types uh, using this model of parasitology and co-host and host pathogen coevolution. I mean, it's absolutely asinine, but it's I'm connecting the dots, and that's what Substack allows people to do. Like you had a great Star Wars analogy that was fantastic. Like I'm gonna push that out to Star Wars groupies because that may really that's a whole we can talk about that
Will you
later.
please, since you mentioned it, let's tell the listeners to your podcast. So, the Star Wars metaphor is that, so first, Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back, is, in my opinion, the greatest part of the Star Wars, franchise. And if you disagree with that, we can fight about it later. But I will suffice to say, there's the love story. You find out Darth Vader's his father, all this great stuff. But the negotiation, as someone who teaches negotiations for a living, to MBAs, I love the negotiation, right? This deal just keeps getting worse. I've altered the deal. Pray I don't alter it further. And so what I ended up doing is mapping out, so Harvard, you mentioned I went there, and right now, to everyone's surprise, Harvard is the center of the resistance to Donald Trump's administration. No one saw that coming. And I joked, so I'm president of the Harvard Club of St. Louis, and we had our annual dinner, and I gave an address, and I said, we all probably thought that it was the establishment when we went there, but it turns out it was the resistance all this time. And then you look, though, there was a New York Times article that came out with the backstory, and the backstory really changed the way I viewed the situation, because Donald Trump Harvard was really trying hard to make a deal with him, and not to fight. And then they were getting asked things, they didn't want to do it, but they were grudging. They were trying to reach, Jared Kushner went to Harvard. They were trying to find ways to actually get an audience with Trump himself, work out, find common ground. And then finally they got a letter that turned out somebody sent unauthorizedly. Somebody took something and made it much more extreme than really had been planned and just sent it. And then they get this thing and they say, this is just human. This is just a bridge too far. And they said, am I allowed to curse on your podcast? They said, fuck it. And so but what I map it onto is you look at, like, in episode 5, look at Lando Calrissian and Darth Vader's negotiation together, right? Because Han Solo and Princess Leia and Chewbacca, they arrive on Cloud City. They're escaping from the Empire, and but it turns out that Vader knew that that's where he was going to go, to Cloud City. So Calrissian has made this deal, which is that those guys are going to be bait to get Luke Skywalker to come to them, and then Vader gets Luke Skywalker, and these people are going to be unharmed, unaffected. So Calrissian, like Han Solo was his frenemy, and they were old pals, but they were like smuggler people, not real friends. And actually, Han Solo had won the Millennium Falcon from him in a card game, so he was showing up with his old ship that he doesn't own anymore. And then Vader says, actually, no, I'm taking Han Solo with me. And he disagrees with that, but are you disappointed with the deal? I mean, that's, then he says, do you feel like you're being treated unfairly? Actually, no, that line comes later, sorry. But anyway, freezes him in carbonite, takes him away. It's bad enough. He says, oh, the Wookiee and Leia have to stay on Cloud City forever. He's like, well, actually, I kind of like her. That's not the worst thing ever to happen to me. But then he decides, actually, no, I'm taking Leia with me. And at that point, Lando Calrissian is like, just like the president of Harvard, he's like, fuck it. And that's when he jumps into the Millennium Falcon, which was his ship, so he knows how to fly it, takes Leia the Wookiee, and goes off and joins the rebels. But he was a partner to Vader up until he got he went too far. And I map on these sets of events onto each other. And I feel like, Star Wars, there's just so much going on there. You mentioned I majored in Sanskrit as an undergrad, double majored in physics. And, the ancient Indian epics, there, when I first read some of the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, I thought, wow, like Star Wars, just, George Lucas really drew from a lot of wisdom from the ancient epics, and this idea of the hero's journey. And so it just felt like that had to be, um, but But yeah, I feel like, one of the things I'm trying to do in my writing is that I don't see enough people doing political writing who don't hate anybody. And that's actually like been almost a problem in my personal life. I don't think I'm constitutionally capable of hating, of just sheer hatred. And, I think about some things that have happened to me personally where I just couldn't even hate that person. I was involved with some legal stuff, some family legal stuff. I won't go into it, but I had lawyers say to me, I can't believe you don't hate, because I'm like trying to explain that other person's perspective to my lawyers. They're like, how do you not hate this person? I just can't do it. And so, I look at what's going on right now and I'm like, I don't hate any of these people. Everyone's wrong and right. Everyone's wrong about parts and right about parts. And why are we not able to have better conversations? And I don't know that my conversations are the best conversations possible, but I'm just trying really hard to have better conversations from the perspective of like no one is worthy of outright hatred. No one is irredeemable. No children are responsible for anything going on anywhere. No groups have no groups are impossible to reconcile. And I think one of the big dangers right now, we're just being driven in the US, just being driven by so much hatred. And it's clouding even our ability to engage issues. And I'm noticing here, so I'm here in Missouri, I'm in St. Louis, I'm a Brooklyn girl, transplanted to the Midwest because, Washington was just such a great place. And as you know, being in academia, that, to find, my husband's an academic, to find two tenure track jobs in the same zip code is winning the lottery. And you would go anywhere, and St. Louis is kind of anywhere. So, but I've actually grown. It's been 20 years since we've been here. I've grown really attached to the place. I feel like it needs love, and I'm here to love it. But so here I am in Missouri, and you look at the politics of Missouri, and you find that Missouri voters vote very differently on ballot initiatives where you put issues in front of voters than they do for politicians, where they're electing politicians who actually disagree with them about all the issues that they just voted for. And so actually the ballots, almost all the ballots this November went in the progressive direction, and all the politicians went in the conservative direction. And it's just fascinating to me that, the inconsistency, I think, is that we're really we're not thinking about issues, we're thinking about people, and people matter, but I'm concerned that we're really losing the ability to have conversations about issues across boundaries of how people categorize themselves and others.
Yeah, so much so. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think it's interesting, and I was actually thinking about you. I look at Donald Trump as this personalist. I don't want to call him a dictator. I have compassion for all kinds of people, and I think that, and although I used to pathologize people all the time, he's a commercial real estate developer. I grew up in that space with family in that industry. A lot of the negotiation, and I want to defer to you, that's how these people talk. That's their style. It's very it's very much aligned with how many people act. Now, is it appropriate for a bureaucracy, a democracy, to be at the helm? Maybe not, but it's just a different style. But people want
I
to.
want to be in a democracy, the king and the image, the Photoshop crown. I would call him a fish out of water. He's not a good, as we would say in a business, he doesn't have a high person job fit. He's not, he wants to be a king or a dictator, and here he is in a democracy, and it's not a fit. And
Yeah,
here's the challenge though, is that, what he does has worked in that industry, although, people argue it hasn't, because really the most successful ventures have been just selling his name, at royal, licensing out his name. But in that industry, you're working with people who are, you're in a kind of poker game, and you're playing poker with other people who know they're playing poker. And that's a different kind of style than, you're playing poker, but other people are playing, goldfish, right? Or rummy. And, and so, there are a lot of people I've heard who've said things like, Well, the way he's working with these universities, he's being very extreme as an opening. And then, they're over here, he's over here, and they'll meet in the middle somewhere. And so that's a productive way to start conversations. And the challenge is just all of the collateral damage. I'm in a university, you're a university you know, like guy. And here we are, looking at research studies being pulled in the middle. You have cancer research, all kinds of health research. You have clinical trials where people are receiving life-saving medical treatments. You have studies, I sometimes work with data that have been collected by large scale entities that have collected, every 10 years, they go back every 15 years, every 5 years, they go back to the same people and collect data over time. And so if you can't turn the light switch off and turn it back on. You can't like play poker and have a hand of poker go wrong and then you just take a break and go back. You can't do that because, if you lose track of your participants, you're just not going to find them again in 5 years. There are people whose job is to keep up with the contact information of these people who are 10 years later. There's literally people's jobs. So if you cut them, you cut a string, you can't sew the string back together. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge because it's such a clash in mindset. And I don't think a lot of people understand how universities work. And I'm going to take some of that blame for ourselves because we haven't been good at explaining how universities work. There are a lot of people right now, who are upset about foreign students because these foreign students are taking our domestic students' slots at these highly competitive colleges. And, that's a conversation we have to be willing to have. And when I actually have one-on-one conversation with people, I'm able to point out, well, most of the international students are in graduate programs, and they're in graduate programs that Americans don't want to be in. In fact, we prefer American, when we have domestic candidates, they're at the top of the pile. But there aren't a lot of people Americans who want to get PhDs in engineering right now. They don't want to do it. And you know why? Because you make more with a master's in engineering. You earn more money with master's in engineering than a PhD in engineering. And Americans, they don't need a visa to come to they can get those jobs. Whereas people elsewhere see this PhD in engineering, it's an opportunity for them that's better than their other opportunities. Whereas for Americans, it's actually a worse opportunity. So you look at that and you say, and a lot of international students the universities are making so much money that they're subsidizing the domestic students. So, and then you look at, I went to Harvard. A lot of the international students at Harvard are engaging in what you'd call soft diplomacy. So when I was an undergrad, Benazir Bhutto was Prime Minister of Pakistan. She went to Harvard. Helmut Kohl was Chancellor of Germany. His son went to Harvard. And you just had a lot of soft diplomacy. So the idea that you're playing the long game and you're educating a lot of the children of the world's elite. And so those aren't slots that we should say, oh, should have gone to Americans. Those are slots we should say,
Right.
these are people connecting us to the world.
Absolutely. I mean, another example you may not have thought of, but and by the way, I love St. Louis because the St. Louis Zoo is fabulous and the Wild Care Institute is great. And I know many people who had highfalutin positions there. But one thing that's really interesting that you may have thought of in conservation biology, for example, like I did work in India, and I realized at the time, this is exactly why we bring foreign students over to the US, train them, and then take them back because they need to be culturally competent. They need to know the language. I couldn't do the same thing that a student from New Delhi could have. Even though I had some more training in different things, I was working with nonprofits and I needed someone who understood the caste system, for example.
Yeah.
Like this is like your specialty, understanding these cultural differences, as complex as it is. And the other thing that Donald Trump, I want you to speak to this, the grant cycling. Like, I mean, he disrupts stuff. He doesn't understand the domino effect. But it's kind of a shame that there are academics, or at least a few, hopefully, in his administration, who might say, okay, the light bulb goes off. This is going to have dramatic repercussions. So,
Yeah. So one thing real quick, I just want to pick up on, I love what you pointed out that you had a student who was able to help you understand the cultural differences. And I want to label that you were building cultural translators, and that is so priceless. And the idea that we have people all around the world who understand American culture and can translate for us and ideally remember us fondly. Most people who spend a year or two somewhere, look back with fond memories, don't want to bomb that particular city, for example, if nothing else. But you're saying about does Donald Trump have people who understand that the effects of the grants being canceled, and you don't even have to, it doesn't matter what happens on the legal system. You can stop these grants by just delaying the grant cycle, just delaying these panels. I've served on panels. I flew to DC. If you just say, I'm going to reschedule that by a week, well, you have a bunch of people who had plane tickets and they all had it in their calendar. You can just drag your feet. But are there people who know what a problem that is? Probably they know, but I don't know what's the motive, and is it is that the conversation that the people who support um, the destruction of universities as we know it, do those people mind? And I've had a lot of people who I know voted for Trump say, maybe these universities just need, maybe it's like the phoenix. No one's used that word phoenix, but it's what I imagine while they're speaking. Maybe you just need to burn it to the ground. People have said that. They've used the word, you got to burn it to the ground and start over. And what I say to that is universities are like cities.
Hmm.
So WashU is literally WashU plus its fully owned healthcare, a subsidiary of its exclusive partner, BJC. WashU plus BJC is the largest employer in the state of Missouri. And we are responsible directly or indirectly for just a huge chunk of the economy. And so you say, okay, if there are problems, and most big research universities are like us in the sense of just the sheer economic impact on the local economy. And if you take one of these and you say, well, there's a problem in a neighborhood of a city, am I going to burn the whole city down? And I'll say, and we both got into this as Jewish people into these conversations, that I do believe there is anti-Semitism on college campuses. I think it's terrible. I mean, we could have a long conversation, and I could go on about, and not only is there anti-Semitism, there are people at the same time that there is anti-Semitism, they're trivializing anti-Semitism and saying it's fake and blaming the victim. Like, people will have a swastika painted on their door, and people say, well, he just painted it for sympathy. It's terrible. There are students who are ostracized. There are students who are told they can't be in clubs if they don't denounce the existence of a nation. They've never been there. It's halfway around the world. And so there's so much going on. I had faculty colleagues who say incredibly anti-Semitic things. But here's the problem though. Like, as true as that is, you're going to burn the whole city down? You're going to burn down the whole city? Because I would like all that to be fixed, but there's a procedure, and I think what we need to be more procedural. There's a procedure. You put in you apply for a violation. You make a complaint. You make a grievance. It gets investigated. The university is told, you've been found in violation. You have this much time to fix it, and we're going to go. It's like a procedure. You don't just burn the whole thing down. And
Yep.
so yeah.
No, go ahead. Keep going.
No, I would like to see more focus on procedures, transparency, and consistency.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State, another example, land grant school. When I was there, I don't know how it ranked, but it was, I think, the largest allied health institution in the world because it had a vet school, a medical school, public health school. And the extension programs at these land grant institutions, like, although I worked with wildlife, I was also affiliated with an avian health lab. Now, these practitioners, my advisor, who moved on and became a dean elsewhere, she was helping practitioners in the field. Like this was after 9/11. Well, let me just say, so she was helping practitioners in the field. Her relationship with these people was critically important, and if she didn't have the funding to go into the field, she may not have been able to stop, let's say, an emerging or re-emerging
Mm.
infectious epizootic or epidemic. So the other thing I wanted to say too is that after 9/11, a Sudanese postdoc that I was very close to, we actually read Al Jazeera together in the morning because I contested a lot of things she said. They thought the FBI came into our laboratory and like disrupted stuff because they thought maybe this Sudanese national was working with anthrax. Well, we didn't even have the biosecurity like it was a mismatch. And to think that was after 9/11, what Donald Trump does now is so much more reckless with his interruptions. So, I mean, it's so much more dramatic. Sorry, I didn't mean
No, you're absolutely right. It's reckless because I think it shows a lack of understanding about the importance of staying connected in the international community. I mean, we could have long conversation about, how are we interacting with our allies right now, and think realizing that the brain drain, the concept of the brain drain, we are the beneficiary of the flow of international minds, great minds, where they want to be here because of our research universities. So they punch so much higher than their weight. Even again, Washington BJC are together the largest employer. That already is a very big deal. But they're also bringing in people who, if they are able to stay, are very high performing taxpayers, members of society who are, we're getting best and brightest. We're getting people from all around the world. Some of the smartest kids, and their brain drain in those countries are losing these great people, and we're getting these great people. And I've always thought you should, and I don't mean this to be, what would be the right word? I don't mean this to be elitist, but I've always thought you should take anybody getting a graduate degree from a reputable university and just give them a visa right away. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to help refugees. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but everything needs to be considered and reformed. But I'm saying if you have a PhD from MIT, just have a visa automatically. For goodness sake, we should be begging these people to stay in the US and pump up the economy.
well, the other thing, and by the way, I want to have you on if time permits many times, so we don't feel like you have to get everything in. But I had another person in my lab. This makes me think of your diplomacy comment. He was the son of the Minister of Agriculture of Thailand. Not only was he bringing that relationship with, Thailand to in terms of agricultural research, et cetera, and his acumen, et cetera, he was on a grant that it was a grant that didn't take anything away from kind of in-pocket expenses, if you will. I'm using that in very layman's terms. So the money that he was granted, and because there was certainly no influence of his parents. I mean, maybe he had more resources to come to the U.S., but the money that he was doing, I'm trying to be careful not to specify, but the money that he was granted was from a fund that was atypical for that particular lab and that department and that college within the university. So that was an extra bonus. And again, Donald Trump, by cutting those kind of opportunities off, not only hinders diplomacy, but he messes with resources that are essential freebies. So, sorry, I jumped in on that, but
No, yeah. I think that's really important. I think these are relationships because, one of two things happen when you get these international students. They stay or they go back, or maybe they go to somewhere else, but they stay in the US or they leave the US. If they stay in the US, I mean, immigrants are some of the engine of, go to Silicon Valley. There's so many people who are born outside the US and they're just incredibly successful. They're creating jobs for Americans. They're creating a tax base. They're moving and grooving, and we should want to keep them. But then you look at the people who go back, and what do? Well, because of their US degrees and training, they're some of the most influential, wealthiest, most powerful people in their society because they have these US degrees. They rise to the top, and that means that around the elite around the world, a lot of the people who are big decision makers around the world have American degrees, experience, cultural experience, and ideally fondness for the US. And so this is just a win. Now Trump has said that he's concerned about whether these people are criminals. And that's a background check. You can run that background check. And they run criminal background checks. And so, all of these problems, you can solve them if you actually pick apart what's the problem here. what's the actual problem and how can we address that actual problem? But if the problem is, there's anti-Semitism on college campuses, yes, there is. But then you're just going to like pull all the grants. You want to pull the nonprofit status of a university, which is unprecedented. The IRS is not supposed to be politicized. The government is not supposed to be able to tell the IRS whom to audit, whom to pull. That's not supposed to happen. And so you're going to do all that because of one issue on campus. And what's a struggle too is that it's disingenuous. We all like, and by we, I mean Jewish people who are paying attention to issues of anti-Semitism in the US. We were called the part about how the Charlottesburg marchers were described as having good people on both sides. These people had tiki torches and they were saying Jews will not replace us. I don't find those people to be good to me. I mean, so the idea that they're good people on both sides and that's one of the sides makes me feel like if that person is saying, I want to burn down Harvard for the sake of the Jews, I just think that's, oh yeah, that's a 1-2 punch. I'm going to disrupt, I'm going to burn something. I'm going to burn the equivalent of a small city. I'm going to burn it down and blame it on the Jews. But that doesn't end well for us.
Yeah, I mean, the other assault on matriculated students, which interests me, well, is really quite unfortunate, is that, in Donald Trump's mind, and I don't mean to just pick on him, just symbolically, students in the undergraduate space can stop a year and then start over, or they go, the sequence of the curriculum is such that if they drop out, they can pick up in the next year. But in many of these graduate and professional programs, if you drop out, you may have to start all the way over because of the cycle of the curriculum. And that may be less common, but I mean, there's just so many ways that it's disruptive. Um, George Lucas should really be appreciative of your analogy because or your model because in the feature film world we should actually submit that to him because it's such it's so true. And this must really fascinate you because as someone who studies organizational behavior at such a sophisticated level, there's such an opportunity to break down a bureaucracy in crisis. And it must be in many ways so frustrating to just watch it happen and there's not much you can do, right?
It is really hard. And it's hard to know what are the degrees of freedom right now to do anything. What are they? And I think I mean, you and I first came into contact because I was writing DMs to anyone who said anything halfway intelligent on that MACA page, anyone who said anything that was not hateful. I remember that, and I was like, "Hey, just want to touch base. I don't hate anybody either. Like this is," and because voices were being silenced. I mean, just people would say something incredibly moderate and they would be shouted at and sometimes even banned from the group. And so that's how you and I met. And the things people are willing to say, the things the lack of compassion, the lack of what would the lack of scale.
Mhm.
That here's a problem, let's fix a problem. Instead, let's just hate everyone who wears the keffiyeh. I don't know if you remember if you were on this one time. There was a large group prayer in Manhattan, and somebody posted about this and they were very upset about these people. And I wrote, mark my words, Jordan, within the next 2 weeks, I will be blocked from that site. I wrote in the comments, this is great. Look at all these people peacefully expressing their religion, not a protest sign in sight. No, not a political symbol or signage anywhere in sight. Just people living their best lives, praying to the God of their choice. And then people basically there are people who have gone off the deep end, and by people there are like Jewish people have survived the millennia because we're a little bit paranoid, and Woody Allen, who I know we're not really supposed to like anymore, but he had an expression, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. And so that's how we've survived, is that, we always have, like, we're looking over our shoulder, we see danger where it doesn't exist because it's worse. There's signal detection, right? You see danger, two by two, you see danger, there is danger. The correct negative, like, I don't think there's danger, there's not. Correct positive, I think there's danger, there is. But the problem is that, like any signal detection system, you're going to have errors, and you have to decide which kind of errors do you prefer. Do you prefer to see danger where it's not there and you're just getting your stress out, but you're okay then? Or do you want to not see danger when danger is there? That one, Jewish people really have been, we've as a culture and society, we've evolved to really deprioritize that cell. We don't want to be in that cell. If there's danger, we want to know. So sometimes we see danger where it isn't there, but that's been overall over the centuries and millennia. It's been more adaptive for us to see danger that's not there than to miss accidentally danger that really is there. So, you would say our gain is high, like we've turned up the gain. So sometimes, if you really need to read something, you might read into noise a bit too. So there are people, again, like, I don't hate them. I think they're being absolutely ridiculous and destructive, but I get where it comes from. The reason that their ancestors survived to have this moment on a Facebook page, like, what are all the things it took for you and I, to our ancestors all to survive and to come from wherever they are to get us to this one special moment where we're looking at Facebook. And and there are a lot of people who are a lot of, they survived some shit, and they did it by looking over their shoulder. So these people are looking over their shoulder and they're worried. But as you know, it's a bunch of Muslim people praying, man. Like, if you want to distinguish anti-Semitism from, politics across the world, you got to give these people the same break. Cut them some slack. They're just Muslims praying. They're we don't know that they're not, like, affiliated. We have no reason to think that they have any particular political affiliation, interests, activity. They're just a bunch of people praying. And so I'm frustrated. I'm frustrated because that group, you know, and I've gone back and forth. Like, I hold Jews to a higher standard on these issues because we've been on the receiving end of a lot of bad things. And I feel that that actually requires us to be more thoughtful about the experience of others because we've experienced some shit. We shouldn't be dishing out some shit. It's not like, oh, this is our turn to dish out. No, no, no.
Right. The hypervigilance in combination with the logical fallacies are just rather amazing. I mean, for example, there was a professor at Brown. People were all over this woman. They shared a picture. I just went and looked at her bio. The picture was taken like 20 years ago. I think she was she was in the dance department and she had Islamic garb on, but she was not promoting anything. It wasn't recent. It was ridiculous.
And
But
it's Islamic garb. There's nothing wrong with it. That's
exactly,
cultural. That's not
exactly.
political.
But there's also there were people who were putting there were people who looked at a syllabus and they're like, oh my God, they're using this text. I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, why don't you look at the syllabi for your kids' courses and everything else? You'll find something probably offensive. We read stuff in English literature that can be somewhat offensive. It was there before this conflict even started. But they're reactive. The amygdala is being hijacked and their frontal cortex is not working.
Well, with the syllabus, I would want to know, in what way is that text being held up as a role model, or is it being problematized in some way? So I would want to know, that, because if you read something problematic and it's presented to you as problematic, that's very different than if you read, if you read the Elders of Zion and somebody's presenting that to you as, a history lesson, that's going to be really bad. But if you're reading the Elders of Zion in the, Jewish studies program to say, like, well, we need to understand the conspiracy theories, so here is the original text. So I think a lot of it is about the faculty, and we have a responsibility in our syllabi then, to make sure people understand why why these are being read. And you have the opportunity for each reading. In my class, the case studies that we read, they have questions, they have study questions. And if the study questions are explain why Israel is a settler colonial nation that does not deserve to exist, that's a different study question than explain why there are people who say that it is not. But I'm over the hypocrisy, by the way. I'm just over so much hypocrisy. And now I'm just going to go on a soapbox because you invited me, so I get to. But at WashU and at a lot of universities, we have a land acknowledgments, and I'm just really problematizing the land acknowledgments. I'm learning from them, and I'm looking around, wondering what sense I'm making sense of them, and I'm wondering what sense other people make of them. But here in Missouri, so we'll start at WashU. Some meetings will say that we are on the sacred grounds of the Illini Confederacy and Osage Nation, and that just reminds me every time, like I have benefited from colonial settlers, like I have. And what responsibility does that give me? And what humility must that give me? And then, like Israel's a settler colonial nation. Like, where were we? Like, what is that? Does that land acknowledge? And then I'm like thinking, well, what are the people who are stating these land acknowledgements or where they came from? What was their plan? What was the goal of the land acknowledgement? And I don't think that the goal was um, motivate people to engage in activism on behalf of the Native American community and think about reparations and ameliorating a lot of great harm that is still happening in those communities. No, I think it's like absolution. Like, it's like confession. I'm going to go to confession and say, hey, I did all these things. And then the priest will say, hey, say three Hail Marys and you're totally cool now. And I mean, that's like, I don't know, that's a Jewish person's imagination of what confession is like. I've never done it. I think that's what happens in the movies. And so I think that's what the land acknowledgements are, the Osage Nation and the Illini Confederacy, like, all right, now we're done, absolved, on to the next. And you're like, well, why? Well, how come we're on stolen land and we say out loud we're on stolen land and somehow everybody's there's so many protesters who don't seem to take seriously the idea that we are just like Israel. We are just US is just like Israel. I'm not saying that the way Israel was created it was good, but I'm saying that the way we were created was the same. And people will come up, pick hairs because nothing's ever exactly like something else. And I think there a lot of the people I get into those conversations with will say, well, it's different because Israel is a Jewish nation. It's an ethno state. And I said, like, the majority of nations in the world are ethno states. The majority, because you look up what's the definition of an ethno state, it's that the country has a majority of people, the vast majority of people are from a group, and that group's interests are best served. And then you say, well, I live in Missouri where people talk about how this is a Christian nation and who are the real Americans and not. And I live in a state in Missouri. There are laws that have been passed, particularly around reproductive rights and family type laws, that will actually say in the law that this is drawing from Christian faith, which is, I mean, we're like, what do we think is going on here? But you look at so many parts of the world are for that national, for that ethnic group and have a state religion. And it's the same. And then you look at Europe right now, and I'm interested in whether this is happening in your friendship circles, but in my friendship circles, and I personally, a lot of white people are applying for ancestral citizenship in Europe. And and what does that mean? So Ireland and Italy, these are ethnics, these are blood, these are ancestry. Ireland and Italy, you have to be a white Catholic. And that is an ethno state. But people said, well, you don't have to, it's not written in the law that you have to be a white Catholic. So well, it doesn't have to be written in the law. The zero people qualify who, I mean, maybe you have a multiracial person, but zero people qualify whose grandparents were not white and Catholic. Look at Germany, look at Poland, look at Hungary. These are white people only, and they can be Christian or Jewish, but it's based on blood. And you say, like, how come Israel is so different than this? How is that different? How is it different? But it's different because the Germans don't say out loud, you have to be white. to take advantage of this policy because they don't have to. They don't have to say it. Only white people qualify. You don't have to write that down. You don't have to say this is limited to Christians and Jews. Muslims need not apply. You don't have to say that. You say it's based on grandparents. Well, who are the grandparents? There weren't Muslim Turkish citizens at the time of grandparent births. So I just keep I'm just tired of the hypocrisy. And you know what, I'm the worst now, I'm just really going to so far. The worst thing is when you call people out on hypocrisy and you really spell it out and they accuse you of whataboutism. Well, you're saying, what about this? Yeah, well, actually, if you look up the definition of hypocrisy, it's you do one thing here and a different thing there. So by definition, hypocrisy is you're saying this, but what about that? Like it's just by definition, every hypocrite has a what about. Every hypocrite is can every hip you know catching someone in hypocrisy is saying, well, what you're doing this here, what about there? And so I'm over the hypocrisy. I'm over the hate. I'm over the part where people in a Christian, in a majority Christian nation will do something that is invisible to many people. But when a Jewish nation does the exact same thing, they notice it and criticize it.
Well, this dichotomy, I mean, this dichotomous thinking, this all like this is also a sign of our political landscape. I mean, it's either you either fit in this category or that. There's no dialectic when we consider political identities, even. I mean, I don't see it that way. And this nuanced perspective is very important. I mean, I think of Rabbi Hillel Silver, who was my father's rabbi. He was a Zionist leader, and he was very careful to say something to the effect of Israel is not a Israel is not a prize. It is a refuge. I'm putting words in his mouth, but the idea was the sentiment I often get is, well, uh, you've got this thing like it's a badge of honor and it's a war chest, and in fact it's just symbolic of a refuge from anti-Semitic violence. And so looking at it through that lens, well, I don't know, it's hard to win arguments these days because everybody, or it's hard to persuade people tactfully because there's so much dichotomous thinking. It's either this or that, all or nothing. So
Oh, and along those lines, I want, and I've been starting to draft this one for Substack. I want to retire the word Zionist. And I want to retire it for two reasons. One, everyone means something different. So it doesn't move conversations forward if you have a key label that is ambiguously misunderstood by three people have three different definitions. So it's not clear, that doesn't clarify, it doesn't illuminate conversations. But the other reason is it's just plain old racist to have a word, have a whole vocabulary for Jewish people where there is no equivalent vocabulary for any other group ever. And he's like, what is Zionism? Zionism is just, it was a philosophy a century ago. Should we do something? Yes or no? And then we did it. And now it's just, now, you know what? It happened. You don't believe in it. Do you believe in a nation? Like, what other nation has a word for whether you believe it should exist? We have a Jewish state in Israel. Do you believe it should exist? Like, who has the standing to have a belief about whether it exists? Like, there's no word like, I don't believe that Luxembourg should exist. Like, what is Luxembourg? Like, why is it a tiny nation like in the middle of Europe? Why does that exist? I do not believe, like, who gives me standing to have an opinion about whether that should exist? That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. You know what? It exists and it should behave itself it should comport itself in a manner worthy of being in the community of nations. And I personally do not believe it is doing that. I believe its behavior absolutely needs to change. But then the idea that you're going to question whether it should exist, or you want to say that people in the US should have the standing to say what their immigration policy should be of a nation across the world. Who has standing? But somehow, because there's this word Zionism, that's an ism, you get standing. Anyone in the world walking down the street gets the standing to say their opinion of Israel's existence. And I just think we got to get rid of that word and say, well, it's not that we can't have a conversation about the equivalent of Zionism. You just have to use words that could hypothetically apply in a non-Jewish space. So you say, like, not say, oh, I'm an anti-Zionist, but say, I am a person who believes Israel should not be Jewish. Just say that sentence because now I know what you mean by anti-Zionism. But somebody else, anti-Zionist to them means I believe Jews should all leave Israel. You know, one person says, I believe Israel, what they mean by anti-Zionist is that Israel should open up to non-Jewish people at immigration and have right of return. And other people, anti-Zionist means all the land should return to the 1948 owners. That's just completely different conversation. So I think just get rid of, I made a joke like, hey, I'm on the board of PBS 9 or 9 PBS, right? And Antiques Roadshow came to St. Louis. And that got me thinking, you know what? Like the word Zionism is an antique word. Let's just send it to Antiques Roadshow. It's not useful anymore. It's not moving conversations forward.
Yeah, I mean, this focused, ambiguous lexicon gets weaponized every day, and it evolves without us even knowing. Then it gets used in this context and then in that. We've lost control of a lexicon, and it's been weaponized against people who had different intentions than have been suggested. It's harmful. I was thinking that before 10/7, some couple years before, I had interviewed Raham Khan, who was married to Imran Khan, a former prime
Oh,
minister
from
of
Pakistan.
Pakistan. And she took such pride in the fact she, I think, is Iraqi. And she took such pride in the fact, actually, that Israel and Pakistan were very similar, have similar histories, right? Different in nature. I'm not drawing this parallel some people listening may think, but very similar nations and how they were created to some degree. And she at least took pride in the fact that Israel and, as she saw it, Pakistan had these similar histories. The socio-political and geopolitical issues are far different there, but I was impressed by her insight into that. And I'd love to hear what she says now. Maybe I should have both of you on if she'll come on, because you could ask her far better questions than me. But she's now in the UK, but she has great insight into this issue. And she brought it up. I did not bring up, Israel was not a hot media topic at the time. We were just having a conversation. So we can talk about that. But these new cultural nuances are so fascinating, but we're dealing with so much chaos in a divide and conquer. Trump, not to pick on Trump again, but his chaotic style makes it so hard to center. It changes the temporal issues around how
But it's
we.
deliberately chaotic. It's kind of like in Manhattan, in New York, a lot of times there'll be street, like, people will do dance or magic tricks or something. Someone else is picking your pocket while this is happening. And I feel like that, it's a sometimes the chaos is distracting. I'm gonna do 5 things in a day so that you can't possibly pay attention to all 5.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And one thing that might interest you, another friend is a former affiliate of the Colombo crime family. And I said to him, we before all these events, I said, what do you, in Trump's first term, I said, what do you think of this guy? Is he running this like the Colombo crime family? And then I thought what you were saying earlier, this guy was in legitimate business and then went into crime before he was repurposed and rehabilitated. And there is a mismatch. You cannot do both successfully because stylistically they're so different. You can succeed at one or you can succeed at the other, but it's very hard to adapt to
Hard to
act
go back and forth. It's hard to code switch. Yeah.
that
But I
code.
think I love that you said Mafia Bus. That does seem to me like his style.
Right. Because it's the way he works with his cohorts in a very unconventional way that's anti-bureaucracy, and then there's also this element of, telling one constituency one thing and another, like just there's a system to it that I don't know, you may know, but it's very interesting nonetheless.
Yeah. So I'm still intrigued what brought you to the MAGA LA event? Because yeah, the particular regions, those are in-person meeting groups, right?
Yeah, I wanted to hear. Well, I had attended MAGA, and I offered. I wanted to,
MACA or MAGA?
Mecca.
Okay.
Sorry. Oh my God, I can get myself in so much trouble on a podcast. I was on the MACA Facebook page, and then they were talking about starting groups in different states or regions, whatever. And I thought, wow, these people are missing out on a conversation that we're having on Clubhouse, this app, where we've got Palestinians and Israelis, American Jews, other diasporic communities all talking. And yes, it gets heated, but I thought if some of these parents heard the stories from this culturally diverse community all on a safe app, remote and safe from potential harm, physical harm, that maybe they would get some insight into how other people think and develop some empathy.
So you
But
were going there to help, you know, pull them up back from the ledge.
a little bit, but they weren't that, this group wasn't so, when we met, people were much, of course, different in person. They weren't so agitated as they come across in these forums.
Yeah, I mean, this is the risky shift, as they say. You know, you're around somebody who says something, bold, and then you say something bolder, and then it's a cycle. You know, it's self-fueling. But any of these people alone actually can be much more reasonable.
Yeah, there's a toxic element that just perpetuates itself. And I was really curious what these people had to say. Um, and part of it was because I feel, and this is what I asked you, I think, in a correspondence or suggested, if you went to college, that doesn't mean you understand university culture. You were a student, much like professional
Yeah.
students don't understand the graduate student experience
Yeah.
because there's you're a more advanced undergrad, but when you're a graduate student, you get caught up in all the political drama in the department.
Yeah, just because you live in a city doesn't mean you understand how the government works.
That too.
Yeah.
100%.
I think, understanding how universities work. I mean, I don't understand why there aren't more sitcoms about university politics. And, there was Henry Kissinger once had this expression, the fights in university campuses, like, the political battles are so big because the stakes are so small.
Yeah, so that Kissinger article or that Kissinger phrase that he popularized, uh, the politics of academia are so vicious because the stakes are so small. People been offended by that in academia, and I'm like, well, let's say the stakes, like I look at it a little different. The stakes can be very big, but I think he was getting to the pettiness of some of the things you see with these really enormous productive brains in the academic world, but they can be very petty and vicious toward each other, and egos can dominate. I don't know. I hope I didn't distort your perspective on
Right.
it.
I think it's right. And I think that you're it's hard because universities are like are total institutions. People work in it and live in it, and we eat here, and so it's hard. You can really live inside some walls and not know where you are in connection with community outside. And so I think, and a lot of people, a lot of professors went straight through. A lot of them went straight from undergrad to a graduate program to a faculty position, and I've never really worked for a living. And I say, I mean, of course, academics are jobs. Being a professor is a job. You get paid. You pay your mortgage with it. But somehow, I don't think of it as working for a living. I don't think of it as a job where, like the people who've even like myself worked 2 years in a the for-profit sector before joining before doing a grad program have a very different perspective than the people who just went straight through. Because we've seen, what does a workplace look like when people actually care about efficiency, for example? When people's productivity is evaluated by the marketplace rather than a bunch of reviewers who are also just like you. What does it mean to serve a client? The client isn't just like you. You need to build empathy, and you need to build empathy and an understanding of what a different person wants and is willing to pay for and believes is valuable. And that may not be what you believe is valuable, but client services is about meeting people where they are and delivering something they find of value. And I think in academia, like the person who's just gone straight through has no thing, because they for a lot of faculty, like, we know what our clients should want. We're going to make our clients have the thing we want, and we often just really don't care that much about what they want. And if you've even been in a for-profit sector for a year or two, you understand that's a foreign way of thinking for most of the of society and enterprise.
Yeah, I mean, I served in two roles. I've held courtesy faculty positions when I worked at different zoological parks. So this is really tricky, right? This is one of the trickiest jobs because you've got this institutionalized culture on one end, and I would be working as someone who has academic experience and familiarity for people who had no formal education but were really talented. But they also catered to different stakeholders. And I'd have these researchers contact me who want to come in, take it, take an opportunity to get some publications out of something and advance science in their own way, but they're very pigeonholed. They're very focused on one thing. And then you've got this person who doesn't understand the academic culture necessarily, and they're like, that is so disruptive. What do we get out of it? It was always difficult. Zoos and natural history museums are very interesting places because it used to be that you had a very blue collar workforce among the animal care professionals, the maintenance people, not unlike university in different sectors. And then you've got these PhDs and these veterinarians, people with multiple doctorates who some come out of academia, some didn't spend a lot of time there, and they're not tenured, but it's just a real matrix. It's really interesting. And trying to be a liaison between the folks who are removed from the institutional culture, it's rife with problems, but some places do it really well. San Diego Zoo managed to do a really good job with that kind of thing. But
I just want to give a shout out to the St. Louis Zoo. I think they're doing wonderfully, and I've been involved with them in some of the thinking behind the new wild animal park that they're building in North County. They managed to get this enormous plot of land. It had been an estate for the plumbers and pipe fitters. It was a retreat site for them, and they have it, and they're putting they're all hoof stock. So no predators. I think they're not ever going to have predators, but they have the giraffes are the star of the show, and they have all kinds of bok, gazelle. I'm forgetting the name of all the which particular, and they have their zebras are there, and they're great, and they're going to end up having well, I shouldn't say. I want to say ostriches, but they have all kinds of hoof stock, and they're really thoughtful about how, like the zoos when we were growing up were basically like sideshows. They were for entertainment, and now so much of what they do is about conservation. and they're just so thoughtful about it, and they want to have the animals as close to their natural habitat. And I saw this whiteboard there the other day. I was there back there, and they're thinking a lot about which animal, how to increase the genetic diversity by bringing animals from different places of that species all the way over. And they have there's like a herd that's all females. What are those called? Like they're the gray, they're like a kind of buck. I want to say they're horned. And I don't know. How could I forget what they're called? But there's just one dude, and then he's gotten all of the females pregnant, and now he has to go.
Oh,
you know, and
or
they're just
or it's what you're talking about.
yeah, yeah. And so they're thinking, they're really thinking like two steps ahead of like, well, how are we going to reintroduce, how are we taking critically endangered and moving them just to endangered and then moving them, and I think it's just beautiful. It's so different. I mean, it's so different just where they're not there to ogle at.
Yeah, I mean, I did some stuff for the St. Louis Zoo in terms of media back when they had giant salamanders, and we talk about reintroduction programs. Zoos are really progressive. In fact, many zoos talk about indigenous people and their relationship to the natural landscape. The Bronx Zoo, even with their Congo gorilla forest, which is probably 20 years old now or more, they had researchers included in the graphics. The question is, is the public going to the zoo still to learn? Are they absorbing this material? And zoos try hard to engage people, but are they going there for entertainment purposes in the summer? And it's really hard. Even me, when I go to a zoo, and I don't visit that many anymore, I don't necessarily read and that stuff I used to do, right? But anyways, bringing this
Can I
culture,
say for St. Louis, I think St. Louis is very different because it's free.
right?
Zoo is free, and so I perceive people using it as um as a really great picnic spot, and I perceive people using it as a public park. They allow you to bring outside food, and families will just bring a wagon, bring some food, have a picnic, and there's red pandas here, and there's seals over there, and I love that's one thing I love about St. Louis, because a lot of the great public resources are free. So the zoo is free, the science center is free, Anheuser-Busch tour is free. There's a place called Grant's Farm. It's owned by the Bush family, and I call it Zoo's Greatest Hits.
And you also
And
have that wolf or that wild canid center in Missouri, which one of the daughters of the Anheuser-Busch families, uh, she's involved with. I forget. Sorry, I interrupt.
these things are free. No, yeah, I think these things are free, and so it brings out the community in a different way. And I like that. You see everybody, and the zoo charges for parking. Actually, charges a lot. But if you're willing to walk a couple blocks, then there's always free parking in the park. So everyone, and there's public transportation. So it's just like the whole community comes together in a different way.
Yeah, I
But
mean, Marlon Perkins used to be was a St. Louis Zoo guy, but I do want to share a St. Louis Zoo story. So Eric Miller, who was assistant director at the zoo for a long time, um, I was on a trip with him at a conference, and he said to me, "What are you doing? What are you doing for this morning?" He was a zoo vet, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to the uh uh what's what's the big city in Hungary? Uh
Prague? No,
no,
oh gosh, now I
my
can't believe, my sons would know. They had to draw maps of the world for sixth
um,
grade, but
oh my gosh.
uh,
Anyways,
oh, I'm embarrassed.
I believe I can't think of the name. Anyways, I said I'm going to the zoo. He said I'm going to the circus. And I said, "You're going to the circus?" And it was brilliant because he wanted to learn. This was an opportunity for him to see something that he hadn't seen before. And because animal rights issues are always on his mind from a public pressure standpoint, he wanted to see how this zoo, this Hungarian circus, how they were working with the animals. He wasn't going to push it away. and boycott an opportunity, if you will. He wanted to learn from it. And I just thought that was brilliant. I mean, like that's someone who's really into their craft and profession because they don't want to criticize and judge. They just want to learn, you know.
Yeah, and I think, there's so many things in life that it depends on how you do it. And are you doing something with love? And I mean, I'm not saying I don't know how the circuses normally work, and they're probably incredibly abusive. But then you go to Vegas and there's this guy, oh, I forget his name, but he has a circus of like cats and dogs and little birds and like even mice. He has some mice, and they're all just like they just look like they're having a blast. The dog, like Purina Farms has these dogs doing a dog show. I think those dogs are living their best lives.
Yeah, I mean, we can have a whole nother conversation about animal ethics and how that relates to organizational cultures, right? Uh, like a top-down management, if you're using positive reinforcement with your staff, that's going to help with the positive reinforcement training and conditioning you do with the animals. But if you're treating your staff poorly, are they going to be poised to do a better job improving the welfare of animals, right?
Yeah, and that's like an emotional contagion, right? I mean, if you're working with animals and you feel good about your job, or you're working with animals, you feel bad, the animals feel it. They feel the emotional contagion of the people. And I love it. I have to tell you, by the way, when I was growing up, I always thought I was going to become a veterinarian. And my cat was my best friend.
And why did you not?
I don't know. I didn't, I was, doing physics and Sanskrit. I just didn't, I had no marketable skills. It was sort of, I was sort of drifting a bit. And then I thought, well, there are jobs that you go after, and then there are jobs that come to you. And I took a job that comes to you, and I thought, I'm going to hang out here until I find something I want to do. And it was sort of like a little bit of like a extra bit of bachelor degree, and that's where I got really captivated with psychology in the workplace, because I realized that people stopping by my office to talk about what was on their minds was the most interesting part of the day. And then my office got moved to be next to the mailboxes, so this story couldn't happen today because email existed at the time. This was 1994. Email existed at the time, but attachments to email did not exist. And so people had to print out. When I tell the story to students, they had to print out, you had to print things out on paper from trees, and you would drop it in each other's mailboxes. And then I got moved to be across to the mailboxes, just randomly offices were reshuffled. And so people would just stop by like 3 times a day. People were always walking by. And I realized that was the part of the day I enjoyed the most. So I started getting treats so that people would stop in. And it was just, I realized at some point, wait, I enjoy this so much more than the actual content of the work. It's time for me to quit this job and get a PhD in psychology, which was something else I'd always imagined, doing psychology. And then about a year ago, I was decluttering, and I ran across my well, it was StrengthsFinder or a different company, but something I had done in 1993. And it gives you it had a printout. You could tell it was printed on that kind of like dot matrix, kind of where like
Oh
you
yeah,
had the like dots on the side that you had. It was like that. And I found it. And it said that I should be a teacher or a psychologist or a researcher. And I'm like, they nailed it.
I mean, it's funny. What I loved about the zoo, and I started working there as a seasonal and intern in high school. Even maybe I did my senior project even there. The zoo back then, there were a lot of blue collar workers who had fascinating histories, Vietnam vets, um, construction workers, people who liked animals, but they didn't grow up thinking, "Hey, I'm going to go get into husbandry and conservation." They were, you know, diverse in different ways, and they had such fascinating stories. And I would always kind of like attach this guy to that animal. He likes elephants, she likes big cats, and like these became archetype. These caricatures became almost archetypal for me. And so some of the richness to me is lost in zoos today because it's everybody's pretty much biology degree and and there's nothing wrong with it. It's
Some people like wander off, wander into it. Yeah, it's
yeah,
more.
so it's a I'm fascinated by the organization as much as anything.
I love it. Oh my gosh, I love it. Now I'm struggling. I've never been asked this question before. Why didn't I become a veterinarian?
Well, I mean, the vets have had a rough time. I mean, the suicide rate is very high. I think it's even
True.
superseded dentistry. Um, I don't know
Wait,
all the reasons for that, but I think it's tough when, when there's no solid insurance program, vets know they can help animals, and some people just can't afford it. And so it's different than physicians have enough trouble in healthcare. This is probably even worse because they have less control, right?
you see a lot of, yeah, you see a lot of patients denied the care they need. I see that. Yeah.
And they're not as well compensated, and yet they feel like they've done as much as,
Yeah,
physicians.
it's harder to get into. So my sister-in-law is actually a veterinarian. She's a professor of large animal veterinary at in Wisconsin,
Oh.
um and I learned through her that it's harder to get into vet school than med school than like human doctor school, and also it's predominantly female and it's paid less.
Yeah, I was in a PhD program, was finishing my PhD and halfway, not halfway, well, almost in vet school, and I decided I didn't want to be a clinician, but it gave me a chance to see the difference between professional school and graduate school. And that was tough because I dealt with the stressors, the psychosocial stressors of being part of a political environment and then also being a professional student. And I carried that weight with me. And I'm not saying I was such a gifted student, but I would always recommend someone to do professional school first and then go to grad school if that's what they want to do, you know.
Yeah. Well, oh my gosh, Jordan, it's been so
Yeah.
much fun talking to you. I can't believe the time really flew by.
Yeah. We're solid at an hour. That's great.
That's right.
If you have hours in the future, would love to have you, or half hours. We can
I
talk.
would love that. I would love that. And I hope that anyone who's made it this far in the conversation considers the name of my Substack is What Did You Expect? And I couldn't believe that was available. I found that it's a little bit defiant. I want to set expectations low too. If you like it, great. But if you don't like it, what did you expect?
I will share it with the post. And do you have an eponymous website too, or your lab, or do you not want that shared?
I have a well I just have I mean I have HillaryAngerElfenbein.com, but it's not there's not that much on it that's very exciting content. It's sort of just like the basics, how to reach me and my background.
Yeah.
But yeah, the like it's been a real journey starting to do this writing. I feel called to it. And it's very different. One thing that's challenging in an academic career is constantly reinventing yourself because you can, especially as a tenured professor, you can end up doing the same thing over and over again for a really long time. And so this is a chance for me to just move. I'm moving in a very different direction.
No, it's exciting, and I want to help get the word out. It's such a great opportunity and easy for people to subscribe. So for free or paid, whatever.
For
Yeah.
free, yeah, and all the content is free. They let you charge, but I keep saying it that that paid subscription doesn't get it. Paid subscriptions don't get any additional content. They merely show optional support. But what I really want are just people to get these messages out. Just to have conversations about aggressively moderate political conversations from the perspective of not hating anybody. So that's my goal.
And lastly, I want to let you go, but lastly, you can add podcasts or video and embed them in your Substack. I'm not encouraging you to do this. I mean, I appreciate it, but the point is, this will give you even more content where you're like, you're on a podcast someday and you're like, I really wanted to say this. I'm going to turn this into a Substack speak,
Ah,
it'd be kind of a response to your your video or whatever.
I
So.
love that. I love it. Oh my gosh. So Jordan, we'll be in touch. I had a blast.
Yeah, thank you so much sorry for the technical delay, but it was great. So enjoy yourself, enjoy the summer, go to the zoo. I'll talk to you soon on Facebook and we'll connect. So thank you.
Bye.